Right then, hello and welcome to my video. I guess I'll just start. So, I've got this slide first, just because I feel like I need to give a bit of background, a bit of overview. But the general premise of this video is I'm sort of collating a few theories on cognitive functions and typology, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I thought I'd just present my ideas. It relies on a few other sort of theories and ideas from a few other people. So yeah, I'll just get started. So here is a slide that I've taken from Ben Vazelan from his video on INTPs, and it's essentially it's a visual representation of a theory. I believe it's something like like the tote theory. It's something like that. Forgive me, I don't know the name. But essentially, it's what it's showing here is the different energies of the functions, and then sort of where they fit into this flowchart of a thought process of working through a problem, essentially. So, but what I really want you to take away from this is the energies. So, yeah, I mean, we'll just take a second. So TI and NE, maximum energy, essentially a task which involves using these functions. An INTP will basically do them either to a very high standard, or even make it too complicated, maybe. But definitely they'll do them in a fairly perfectionist way, let's say. Then optimum energy. These two, they'll, when a task involves these, an INTP will, they'll do them fairly well. Maybe not, they won't take them too far, for example, with maybe they would with TINE. Lower energy here, minimum energy, FI, SE. Task involving this, they'll get it done. But, as I said, it's essentially, it follows a pattern here where the less the energy, the more the task will be a bit half-arsed or imperfect, or maybe even not even finished. The value of it might not be enough to warrant the energy, or to complete it. So an example I'll use here with an INTP is SE and TE. Oh, sorry, an example is cooking, right? So cooking involves cooking from a recipe for yourself, right? So in an INTP, the SE and TE, you've got low energy, so you basically you'll do the task, you'll cook, you'll read the recipe, you'll make it, but you probably won't embellish it. You probably won't. You might avoid, for example, I don't know, adding garlic because you can't be bothered cutting it, or that kind of thing. You won't add all the trimmings. You won't make it a great meal. You probably wouldn't want to present it to someone else, let's say, because FISI, your threshold for that meal being satisfactory in terms of maybe taste or filling you up is rather low. Compared to someone who has a higher energy function like that, their cooking is probably going to be far better, to put it bluntly, because their threshold for satisfaction with FISI and their energy for using TE and SE is going to be higher. So yeah, cooking's a good example, and I'll actually be coming back to that later, because that's kind of where I got this idea from. That was my great inspiration. So yeah, take away from this the energies and how that relates to when you're the use of a function. So yeah, just kind of keep this in mind, but we'll come back to it. So yeah, on to the next slide. Okay, so here we have the theory, or the idea, of function aspects. So this, I believe, was originally created by Eric Strauss, the infamous Eric Strauss of Talking with Famous People here on YouTube. I believe it's his original idea, or if not, that's at least where I've heard it first. And the theory goes that essentially, when you're using a cognitive function, or when you're paying attention through a cognitive function, it can either be in in a physical sense or a metaphysical sense. So essentially, let's say with SI, you can be paying attention in real time to the details of something, or you can be paying attention to the sort of broader picture maybe. It's hard to explain, or I struggle to explain it. Or let's say with let's say with NI. Oh no, FE's a good one. FE's a good one to explain. So FE, you can either, let's say you're interacting with someone, and the physical aspect of that would be sort of making that interaction go smoothly, making the other person feel a certain way maybe, or giving off a certain vibe. Whereas the metaphysical side of it would be sort of controlling people's perceptions of you over time, making sure that you don't sort of cause them to think bad of you, I suppose. The sort of the way I'd kind of explain it would just be long term and physical metaphysical is the best way to explain it. I'm just struggling to sort of think of examples here, but broadly, every function can be used in either the metaphysical or physical realm. However, each function has a preferred aspect. So, it makes sense, right? So, with FI, you feel something in the moment. SI, you're paying attention to your physical self in the moment. SE, you're doing something physically to make a physical change in the world. That makes sense. It's physical. It's real time. Metaphysical, NE, it's an idea. It's FE. FE's an interesting one, but I think FE, the free aspect, the preferred aspect of it would be making people feel a certain way about you over time. TI, once again, it's sort of fitting things into a metaphysical framework. NI is kind of similar to that, actually. I'd struggle to. I guess NI is a bit more, intuitive. So this idea is pretty crucial here to me collating these theories together. And in an INTP, we'll just take a look at which functions work here. So actually, I need to point out that whichever type you are, your dominant function will determine which aspect of every single function that you prefer. So in an INTP, TI is metaphysical. Therefore, you prefer using the metaphysical aspect of every function, and I think that would be because essentially every SI thing you take in, every experience you have is filtered through TI. So everything you experience is tinted by your dominant function. So you sort of, rose tinted glasses, or metaphysically tinted glasses, I suppose, would be the idea. So so for example, even though SI is a more physical function, its natural realm is physical, the INTP will prefer using it metaphysically. Hopefully those ideas make sense. I sort of didn't explain it hugely well, but that's the general idea. Each function can be used metaphysical, physical, and each function has a more a natural realm, a sort of more effective realm usually. So I've sort of drawn a lot over that first slide I showed of that sort of flowchart, and here's what I want to point out. So you'll remember from the previous slide that TI, NI, NE, and FE are all, their natural realms are metaphysical. That's the free aspect of those functions. That's where they're most effective. That's where they're most effective. And you'll notice that all of the higher energy functions of an INTP are naturally in the metaphysical realm. The INTP's dominant function is metaphysical, therefore INTPs prefer using the metaphysical aspect of these functions, so they're strong. Their natural realm is metaphysical, the same as the INTP's preferred realm. Therefore, these functions, they just come so easily to an INTP. It's like, there's nothing stopping these. There's no, for example, in an INFP, they've got Fi as their dominant function, which is a naturally physical function. So they prefer the physical realms, and their second function is NE. Their fourth function is SE, and they also have NI. So they have NE and NI in the same places, but they'll use them more physically. So they'll use them more physically, and I'll kind of get to the point here. And then these other four functions in an INTP are all physical and low energy. So essentially what's happening here is, in an INTP, you have these high energy metaphysical functions where the INTP and yeah, I'll leave it there for now, and I'll actually say how I came up with this idea. So this comes back to the cooking idea. This video is very all over the place, but hopefully you get the idea. So how I came up with this idea was, essentially I was one day just hanging out in my room like a boring person, like an INTP, and I was playing a video game, specifically a turn-based strategy game on one monitor. Yes, I have two monitors, and I was watching YouTube videos on the other monitor, fairly sciencey YouTube videos, sort of ideas-based, basically. So a turn-based strategy game is fairly low in SE and TE, right? Because there's no time pressure. You can take your time with them. You can become fairly well versed in how the game will start to play out. And basically, turn-based strategy games don't require much energy here, right? So SE and TE are fine. They're not being taxed. They're not relaxed. They're not draining the INTP. Once again, there's not much FI. It's very analytical. And in terms of SI, you get used to the information coming in. And you don't have to pay much attention to the detail in real time. You can take your time. You can consider the metaphysical detail. I still struggle to parse sort of exactly how SI works here, but I think it makes sense. And then if we come to the other side in that game, the TI is working well. You can think long term metaphysically. NI, you can sort of what's the word, like sort of come to kind of intuitive conclusions about what to do. NE, think of different ideas, possibilities, how to plan out what you're going to do. FE, not really sure. But then this comes to the other side of it, where I was watching YouTube videos, once again, metaphysical. SI, you're listening to metaphysical ideas, you're taking them in. There's not much FI, because it's sort of sciencey based. TESE, not doing anything really. NI, you're sort of either intuitively understanding those ideas that I'm listening to, or I was listening to, watching the video, or I'm coming up with my own ideas regarding them. FE, I think there's an aspect of FE when you're listening to someone. But yeah, what I'm getting at here is that I was completely consumed by metaphysical activity. Nothing about that was taxing my physical brain. I was completely draining my metaphysical brain. And what happened was, I essentially just became tired. I essentially had to stop, right? I was putting my metaphysical brain, my sort of preferred brain, just into complete overdrive. I was saturating myself, entertainment-wise, I guess, purely metaphysically. So when I was tired out, the metaphysical kind of side of my brain was just completely done. And I found myself in this weird situation where I was tending to myself physically. I could only think of doing physical tasks. That's what I wanted to do. It was very interesting. It doesn't happen often, and this was when it became very apparent. Or this was one time when it was very apparent. And I realized I was hungry and tired. And I think what happened was my TE was like, or maybe my NE, but thinking physically, possibly. It's sort of, it gets blurry there. Oh yeah, my NE just physically thought, what's the best way to get this food? Or maybe that's SE. T it was maybe like, I don't know, what's a low energy way of getting food is what I'm getting at here. And I thought, takeaway. So, and that works with my SE. Getting a takeaway is easy. I don't have to actually do any cooking. I just, call a number or go on the app or whatever and get food. And my FI is happy with that. And in fact, takeaway food is probably highly saturating for FI, which kind of makes sense. So yeah, I sort of entered this state of becoming physically, using these functions physically, very naturally and sort of without any hindrance, because I think I'd worn out the metaphysical kind of side of my brain. So that's how I came up with this idea. And then sort of following this through, I noticed that it's the same for ISFPs, except all of their high energy functions are physical, and all their low energy functions are metaphysical. And then with ESTJs and ENFJs, let me just check. ESTJ. So ESTJs all physical, all metaphysical in low energy, and ENFJs all metaphysical, all physical. Very interesting. So what I'd call this maybe would be either highly conscious types, where you highly prefer and it's high energy, and you just always want to use and always do use your valued functions, your conscious functions, and you struggle, and your sort of unconscious side is very weak. So I think I would call these types sort of the most conscious in a way, or they struggle a lot to take advantage of this, of their unconscious functions, except for their sixth function. But yes, or in general, their low energy functions, their unconscious functions, which aren't necessarily correlated, but they are correlated in this case, which is why this sort of theory makes sense here. And yeah, notably, in all these pairings, neither type shares any valued functions. So INTPs, ISFPs, all of their valued functions, all of their conscious functions are completely different, which kind of makes sense, but you wouldn't necessarily get that from just looking at without considering the aspect side of things and this sort of energy levels. It's interesting, and I think it has use, which is what this next slide is about. So this is a sort of visual that I've taken from Right Ruminations. I believe he goes by, I can't remember, I'm sorry. I was watching that Type Tips video where you went by a certain name. I imagine it's your surname or something like that, I'm not sure. But either way, very interesting idea. I love it. It really sparked a lot of interest in me. So it's essentially that the basic idea of the theory is that in turning off one of your valued functions, in sort of possibly consciously not using it, or using it in a way that turns it off, allows you, that's a terrible way of putting it, but either way, in turning it off, it allows you to access an unconscious function. Essentially, in turning it off, it stops obfuscating, it stops overpowering the other function. So, yeah, I'll just read this little thing I did here. So, valued higher energy functions overpower lower energy functions in INTPs, and likely other types, but especially ISFP, because the energy level, because in an INTP, basically all of the high energy functions are also valued, except for SI and I, but I'll come to that later. Now, Right Ruminations in his video calls SI the God function, because through that, in turning that off, you access your your highest energy, your strongest, well, its highest energy in INTPs at least, your this unconscious function. Essentially, the SI stops overpowering it. And also, I think in using SI, you're also using TI, and therefore not using any FE, and the NE would overpower the NI. Yeah, so I would suggest that the sort of God function can be used to access your unconscious, because in engaging in physical SI, its preferred aspect, its natural aspect, or you can therefore more easily engage in a physical activity, which then allows you to take advantage of these unconscious low energy functions, which are all physical in oh, that should say physical. Oh God, I'll have to edit that. But yes, you're essentially you're in. It's a valued function, SI. Therefore, you can consciously take use it in a way which isn't horribly draining to you, to begin or start to engage in an activity which is physical, which will lead to you using these physical functions. And I think in that way, that's how SI in INTPs is the so-called God function, the gateway to the unconscious. Rather than, I think what Right Rumination said was that it was a way of accessing NI in turning off SI, you access NI, which then sort of works to guide these other functions. Whereas in this little sort of in this theory I have here, I would suggest that SI would be the God function, this gateway function, because you can use it to begin using your unconscious functions. And it's probably a combination of the two theories. And it's all very interesting, and this video is fairly thrown together, but I hope there's some really interesting ideas in here. I might revisit it. Essentially I create this very quickly just because I wanted to get the ideas out there, and hopefully you can sort of parse this. I think in some ways it would be good to just go back through the video and read each slide, and I think you'll get the idea. But yes, I really hope this was interesting. Got the cogs working. I really think a lot of it fits very well. I struggle with a lot of this theory here. A lot of the detail doesn't quite sit too well with me. But the cooking analogy I really like. The story of when I was tired, I feel really fits into this theory here, and I can then see how it fits into being able to access other functions. I'll probably do another video where I'll round it up a bit more, because by then I'll have a better grasp on it all. But this is just to get the idea out there, and sort of it's actually helped me to understand it a bit better. And actually, before I finish, I'll just say I would love to make more videos like this for other types. If anyone has any thoughts, because I'm an INTP, I think, and if other people end up watching this that are other types and try to apply this to their type, I would greatly appreciate your comments. And I really hope this was watchable and passable and understandable. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and see you in the future.